Well, good evening, everybody, or whatever time it is, wherever you're at. Um, just jumping on here to try out some new equipment and some new digs. Still have the original setup, but I needed a second and alternative setup so I can use my iPhone as a camera because it has a really good camera on it. So this particular workstation slash recording area will be Mac focused, and the other is Windows PC based and mirrorless camera based. So I probably will use both for now. I mean, not that you guys care. I'm just kind of throwing this out there because got a lot on my mind and I just got to get it out. So where was I? Oh no, where the hell was I? Anyway, thank you for all the new subscribers. A bunch of subscribers came over from Delora and other areas. So the new subscribers from Delora may be in for a little bit of a shock with some of the content on this channel, but I appreciate it so much that you guys came over and subscribed. I really do. If you haven't seen the introductory video for the channel that was put out, maybe go watch that. But this channel is really about non-political type stuff. That's the Fab Four and that kind of thing. I still do that. But this is more for the tinfoil hatty kind of thing, and also for just stuff that I like, like old cars, music, rock music, whatever tickles my fancy. That's what the show's going to be about for that week. So this week, if you've been following along, one of the earlier episodes on this channel, gotta use my words. Use your words, John. So I had a part one of a series that I plan on doing, restoring a 1966 Pontiac Lemans / GTO Tribute. And then that last video, I talked about my thinking about picking up the car, kind of what my intentions are with it, and that I would be documenting the progress of restoring this car. And so this is part two in that series. So I'm just telling you that up front in case you don't want to struggle trying to watch through an entire gearhead muscle car kind of video, if that's something you're not interested in. But I still like keeping the variety. So there'll still be videos about Antarctica, the moon, the sun, whatever, Tartaria, mud flood, whatever you guys want to talk about. Edgar Casey was one that got suggested on one of the comments of one of the videos. So I will at some point do a video on Mr. Casey. Hello, Bueller. But if you have any other suggestions, by all means, put them in the comments. But this way, the titles of the videos should at least give you an idea of the kind of content it has. And if it's not interesting to you, just wait for the next video. So anyway, as we talked about, or as I talked about last time, I kind of went through the thought process about how I selected the car, the other car that I looked at initially ahead of this car. But in this video, I would like to talk a little bit about some of the struggles and some of the crazy expectations some of these shops have, or some of these restorers have, and that kind of thing. So moving on from the selection of the car and the overall condition and that kind of thing, this video I really want to move into talking about how I planned, or what I plan to do in the order I plan to do it. And the first thing here, I might as well pull her up here. Da, 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 da. And it's been interesting trying to use this like I use my PC. This Mac has made it a little challenging for me to get some things accomplished. But once I figured it out, haven't been a PC kid for my whole life. Used Macs infrequently, but I think I have it figured out now. So in this video, as I stated earlier, I'll talk a little bit about the process. So just so you're familiar, this is an image of the car that I eventually picked, and this is on a trailer out of a garage. Like the person that owns this garage is a mechanic, and he has a car up on a lift there. And this was back when I bought the car, 5 years ago. But he's a mechanic by trade, and he kind of does some stuff out of his home shop, which is what this is. So he's nice enough to load the car for me on his trailer, and he's going to bring it to my house. And so this was the old car up on the trailer, getting ready to head, about 25 miles ish to my house. And it just there's something. If you're not a gearhead, not a car guy, I apologize, but I'm just so into old cars and restoring them and just watching them, listening to them, driving them. And I just love the mid-60s A-body GM and this 66 Le Mans. It started out life as a Le Mans, I should say, as a kind of like a burgundy colored car. But it just has such a nice body line to it. And when I bought it, it even had the original, like, old school, like these are from like mid-80s Kragers on there. So if you're familiar with Kragers, BF Goodrich white wall tires, and we'll talk about those in another video because after sitting for 30 years, those tires kind of dry rotted and blah blah blah. Which I did not know that they were super bad from the outside, but I have a picture of some crazy damage to the tires. But so anyway, long story short, so selected the car. The car is getting transported or getting ready to be transported. So the first thing that I kind of did here, oops. Thanks for bearing with me, folks. So this was pulling it up on the trailer, and when I rolled it off the trailer, coming home. So it's, it obviously beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and it's subjective, blah, blah, blah. I just always one of my favorite body styles, if not my favorite. I do like the first generation F body, which is the 67 through 69 Firebird or 67 through 69 Camaro. That is also one of my favorites, but specifically the Pontiac, the Firebird, because as a kid I was totally into Pontiac cars, and it just kind of fit in. So, got the car home, and I just couldn't stop looking at it. The drivers helped push it into my garage, so we backed it in there. Kind of looks a little lonely and helpless. Got the old turn signal or slash the grill missing over here. It just looks like it was tired. Looked like it had a kind of a long, rough life. And at this point, it had been sitting in that building for just about 30 years. And it was covered, and it was originally going to be a project car for the guy that owned the place, but he was kind of into Novas. So he started doing work on Novas. And so he kept putting this off, and eventually he just wanted to sell it because he felt bad for having the car and not doing anything with it. So, and if you remember the story of how I found this car, you'll understand why this was kind of a little bit of a diamond in the rough for me. So, anyway, I was super excited to get this car in the garage and trying to trying to determine what was the next step. So, if you remember some of the pictures that I showed in the last video, um, the wiring was all messed up on the car. It would look like spaghetti hanging out under the dash. The wiring under the hood was horrible. There was a lot of splices and crimps and things like that. And under the dash, there was a couple spots where there was some scoring or some burn marks where you had some either ungrounded or loose wires or stuff connected to stuff it shouldn't be. So the first thing on my list was I got to take care of the wiring. So I decided that I wasn't going to try and fix the current wiring. I was just going to replace the entire wiring harness. So the entire car, the engine wiring harness and interior wiring harness. Um, and if you're familiar at all with old cars and wiring harnesses and that kind of thing, let's see if I have a picture of this thing here. Thought I had a picture of it. Yeah, here we go. This doesn't show all the wires, but I bought a quick wire, as you can see on the bottom by the manufacturer here. Oops. Jeez, come on. Anyway, it's a company called Quickwire, start with a K, and they make a lot of specific wiring harnesses for specific cars from that era, and they make generic wiring harnesses that you can modify to work for any car. So I ended up buying what's called a 14 circuit wiring harness because my car, as it sat, didn't have power anything. So there's no power windows, no power door locks, didn't even have air conditioning, and it didn't even have a heater because the heater core was taken out and a modesty panel was put over the hole to the heater core. So it literally just needed some stuff for the dash and for the engine. So I figured 14 circuit would be perfectly fine for my needs, and it turns out that was the case. So with this particular aftermarket harness, the reason I bought it was there was a couple features. One, the bundles of wires that were attached to the circuit board here, or the circuit breaker box. Every wire was labeled, every couple inches as to what that wire was for. So they were tied off into groups, like one for like tail light group, headlight group, engine group, dash group, stuff like that, shifter. So everything was color coded and labeled beautifully. So it didn't matter where I cut the wire. I always knew what it was for. And this particular brand was actually reasonably priced. I think the whole wiring harness was around $400. And it has modern fuses in it. And they actually have the lighted up kind of fuses, meaning that when a fuse goes bad, you can tell which one goes bad because it glows, or it has a light behind it that kind of shows. So you don't have to dig around trying to figure out which fuse is bad. Had the wiper circuit for the windshields on there, that kind of thing, which are these kind of silver things here. And it also had a kill switch, which is this switch down over here. So for me, it was a nice looking harness, and it looked pretty good, and it came highly recommended. And it came with like a 200-page manual. It was very extensive. So if you had different models like Ford or GM, Chevy, Pontiac, whatever, it had different wiring configurations for ignition and that kind of stuff. So it was pretty self-explanatory. I would have done it myself, but I have limited space in my garage, and at that time I had limited time, and I didn't want to keep plucking at it like little by little. So what I did is I started by taking the interior out of the car, and while I was doing that, what is going on here? There we go. So while I was, oh, come on. So while I was doing that, I was trying to figure out who can I pay to do this? Is there a shop around? So I asked on a couple groups on Facebook, specifically for classic cars and specifically for Northern Ohio, in the Cleveland area. And a few people mentioned a shop called um, Certified Electric, and they were, I don't know, about 20 miles from here. And since they came recommended by a few people, I figured, well, maybe I'll give them a shot. So I looked them up, gave them a call, told them what I was doing, and they gave me a ballpark price initially, but they wanted me to bring the car down with the harness, and so they can kind of quote it a little bit better. So which meant since it wasn't drivable, I had to flatbed the car, you know, 20, 25 miles away, just so these guys can get their eyes on it. But the first thing I thought was kind of strange is when I talked to them about doing the harness, it seemed like they were kind of a little confused. Like they didn't do like pre-made wiring harnesses. They only did like custom wiring harnesses, like wire by wire. So thought that was interesting since this is kind of like a no-brainer, especially if everything's cleaned out of the car and there's nothing impeding your way to take out the old wiring. So anyway, I didn't think much about it. Took the car down there about a week later and dropped it off, dropped the harness off, gave them the Bible, the instruction book for the harness. And it was a father-son deal. Father started the business years ago, and the son's kind of doing it now. But the father was part-time, the son worked full-time, basically. Um, let's see here. What do I need? I guess that works. So I thought, well, this place, all they do is wiring for old cars, so they have to be pretty good. So after I talking to the father for about an hour or so, just to kind of get a feel for who I was dealing with, I saw some of the cars they had in the shop. They had like an old Corvette, like a split window Corvette. They had a 55 Bel Air and a few other show quality cars. Like the paint jobs were immaculate, and the cars just looked great. And they were wiring those cars. So anyway, long story short, I wanted to get a gauge on how long it was going to take because I didn't want it to take all summer. Because when I dropped the car off, it was towards the end of May of that year, whatever year that was, about 4 years or 5 years ago, whatever it was. I'm losing track of time. So they gave me the impression, or he gave me the impression, that they were almost done with these other cars and that my car would be a priority, as it were. And I said, you had specifically asked, you have no problem using this wiring harness that I bought and you guys install it instead of, doing a handmade custom wiring harness like you guys are normally doing here. Oh, yeah, that's great. That's fine. No problem. Yeah, we can handle that. So I got a price and I thought, okay, well, for the price they gave me, it was a couple $1,000, $1,900, whatever it was. I figured it was worth it for somebody else to spend the time to remove the old wiring and install this wiring harness. So it saved me a bunch of grief. So dropped it off at the end of May. And a little bit of time goes on, and I'm starting to plan other things. Like once the wiring harness is done, what am I doing next? And so a month goes by, And I called down there just to check, I wasn't mad or anything, just checking to see the status, and here they didn't even start on it yet. They had just initially they'd started taking some of the wiring out, but they actually hadn't completed that yet. And I talked to the son that time instead of the father, and he gave me the impression, "Oh yeah, we're starting on it now. We're working on it. Sorry for the delay. One of the other cars got a little more work than we anticipated." So I thought, okay, well that's fine. And in my mind, the back of my head, I was willing to wait another month. So that would have put it in July sometime. So another month goes by. I call down there, and the son answered again, and he acted like I was glad I called because he had a question about something. He goes, we're finishing up. We've got we got all the old wiring out. We got the harness fitted for it, and we've got the wiring under the dash attached, but we need to button some things up. So he made it sound like all the wires were still hanging, and there was not any um, wire management done on, so like tucked away and tied up, and so you can't see all the wiring under the dash. Um, so I thought that was, again, I was starting to get a little bit agitated, and I said, well, you know, I said, hopefully, I hope this doesn't take all summer. I said, I really, based on what you told me originally, or what your father told me originally, I was only expecting, maybe 30, maybe 60 days at the most. And I said, because it's kind of cutting into my plans, the process to get this car back on the road. So the longer this car is at this place, it's not in my garage, so I can't look at it and I can't work on other things while they have it. So I do a little, I'm shopping for seats because I did get the original or GTO seats that would have been for that model year. It was a Le Mans, so it had a bench seat, and I took it out, and it had looked like it had some of the old brackets in place for bucket seats, like it had bucket seats at one time, like somebody put some in and then took them back out and put the bench seat in. But anyway, the guy that I bought it from gave me a complete set of GTO, black vinyl GTO seats. So I had the two front seats and the complete back seat. I had the door panels, pretty much the whole interior. The only thing I didn't have was a headliner. So I thought, well, I'll shop for seats, because the more I looked at the seats that I had, the more I realized that when I was a kid, you know, I didn't care if a seat had a headrest or not, and most people didn't anyway, apparently. So, GTO seats are pretty low. They come about halfway up your back. So I found some aftermarket seats on from Summit Racing, and these particular seats still had the same look as the original seats, same like ribbing on the back and the same black vinyl, but they were taller and they had a headrest and they reclined. So they had, I can move um, I can adjust it a lot more for my personal taste, because I have a tall torso. So a lot of times in a lot of cars, my head's almost hitting the ceiling, and I like the neck support. So anyway, so 2 months go by, and in the third month, I was getting a little pissed, and so I actually went down there um, in July, towards the end of July, unannounced. And I did, because I didn't want them knowing I was coming. I wanted to see the car and see where they were at with it. So I went down there and asked to see the car, to see the progress, and they took me in the back and showed me what they had done so far. And it looked like they had most everything connected. They had the wiring run to the taillights and the gas tank and under the dash, in the engine compartment. But the stuff in the engine compartment looked a little, like it wasn't tidy, and the wires under the dash were not tidy. So I said, I'm going to give you guys a couple weeks, but I'm going to pick up my car in a couple weeks even if it's not done. I said I can't screw around with this any longer. I can't wait. I don't want to wait till the end of summer. So what happens? I get the car back in October. Is that's what July, 5 months, almost 5 months, 4.5 months from the time I dropped it off. I was pissed because I literally showed up with the guy I bought it from. He has a flatbed truck, which he does haul cars and stuff. So I asked him to come with me to pick up the car. And so I looked at the progress because I had called and told them I was coming to pick it up. And the son was like, "Oh, well, yeah, we're pretty much done. I'm just buttoning up under the dash." And when he said, "I'm just buttoning up under the dash," I about flipped my lid because you had 4 months to button up under the dash. So anyway, I get there. Oh, and he told me on the phone, he goes, "Well, we tried to start it for you as a courtesy, but we couldn't get it started. You're not getting any spark. You must have a bad coil." So I didn't think too much about that because that was a real possibility. Um, but I didn't expect what I was going to get, which I'll talk about here shortly. So I went there to look at the car and pick it up. So before we backed it out into the parking lot, I looked at the car. Nothing under the dash had been done as far as like from the last time. There was no buttoning up, so no tightening of wires. All the wires were hanging down. They were connected, but they were just all hanging down loose and everything. Nothing was tied up. Same with the engine compartment. All the wires were just kind of willy nilly attached to stuff, but just were not, wire tied together and nice and neat. I'm a neat freak when it comes to stuff like that because I really don't want a fire or anything like that in the electrical system. So I know I'm rambling on, but the wiring is a huge deal to me. That was the to me the biggest hurdle, the initial hurdle that I wanted to get over because I could really start working on the car after that. So the guy that I bought the car from loaded it on the trailer or on the truck, and we took it to my house. I paid the people because I'm not that kind of guy where, I I can't attest at that time to whether they actually did the work that I asked or not. They did not make it neat, and maybe I wasn't, maybe that's not part of their gig is making stuff neat. I don't know. So I paid them the money, brought the car home, disappointed. Like that was first hurdle disappointment. Hit the hurdle, didn't jump the hurdle. So get it home and let's see if I have an engine bay picture here. An older one. Okay. So if you know anything about cars, um, especially older cars, they have a coil that basically takes 12 volts and turns it into like 40,000 plus volts. So it can run through the spark plug wires and to the spark plugs and ignite the gas that's being put into the chambers. So there's combustion. So when I really looked at the car, I looked at the wiring that they did for the coil, and this car still had a ballast resistor. Let's see if I have a picture of that. Maybe I don't. I thought you guys know me. I try to get all the pictures in a folder up front, but apparently I did not in this case. Yeah, those are newer pictures, so those don't show the ballast resistor. But anyway, The cars had a coil and a ballast resistor, and so this black box here is a high performance coil. It's usually used with higher performance engines for hotter spark. I think it's Mallory makes it, and it's like works with a Unilite distributor, and basically the distributor has a photo sensor as it spins around, and it kind of tells the engine when to fire. It kind of opens and closes the points, if you will. So I checked all the wiring for the coil. I checked the coil wire, the main coil wire to the distributor. The ballast resistor, I don't know if you can see where my arrow is here up in the right-hand corner. Um, or this pink wire is right here. The ballast resistor was attached to the firewall right here. And it's usually like a rectangular ceramic piece with a copper end on each side. So you'd have power, like the pink wire from the coil would go to one side of the ballast resistor, and the ballast resistor would basically, or excuse me, it would come from the ignition and then go to the ballast resistor and then to the coil. So from the ignition side here, you have 12 volts, and the ballast resistor just basically drops down any voltage, or it evens out the voltage going to the coil. And a lot of older cars have these ballast resistors, um, because you should get at least 12 volts on the other side of the ballast resistor. And I was only getting like 8 volts or 7 volts or something like that. And on older cars, in the ignition switch, when you turn the ignition switch to the on position, the wires that are connected to the ignition harness in that position would only allow 12 volts to go to, or any power to go to, like the dash and accessories and that kind of stuff. So any of the gauges and interior light, or that kind of thing, but nothing would be going to the coil. So when you turn it one more time, that's like um, like the cranking position, like you're trying to start the car. So when you're doing that, it should have full voltage going to the coil, and then that is amplified to 40,000 or whatever it happens to be. I think this particular one was 60,000 plus. Um, and then that goes to the spark plugs, or to the wires to the spark plugs, which in turn should get ignited. The gas should get ignited and, should start. But again, this car was sitting for a while. And at this point, I hadn't had any other work done to it. It still had the gas tank that it had when I bought it. The fuel system, everything was the same. I cleaned out the carbs a little bit, but the gas was still the same gas that's been sitting in the tank for however long. The guy said he would start it occasionally, like hot wire it, but I don't know how true that was. But so the gas, I dumped some of it out because it did smell like, old gas will smell like varnish, like furniture varnish. And it will not ignite as far as a car goes. It may stutter and that kind of thing and want to try and start, but it won't actually usually run. So I was able to pump most of the gas out. I wasn't able to get all of it, and I put some fresh gas in. So I figured, well, give it a fighting chance, clean out the carbs again. But the problem wasn't getting a full 12 volts to the coil. So I thought it was the ballast resistor. So I replaced the ballast resistor, and the first time I went to use it, it literally started smoking. So like there was either too much resistance somewhere or whatever. Something was going on, and you can see that little white patch there. That's actually where it was smoking against the wall there. So then I made the decision, you know what, just to be on the safe side, I'm going to get a new coil, and I'm going to get what's called a self-ballasted coil, meaning it doesn't need a ballast resistor because the resistance is built in to the coil itself. and I wanted a little more traditional looking coil anyway. Um, I was thinking about replacing the distributor, but I did not do that. So the first step was I did buy a new coil, and that was the new coil. And again, traditional coils have that canister or cylinder look to them. Um, from the guy that I talked to down at the shop, um, at Summit, where I bought it from, I told him what kind of setup I had, and he said this is plenty hot enough for the setup I had. It was hotter than a normal coil, still had 40,000 volts because this was like one of their top end classic style ones, and it was self resisted. So I didn't need the ballast resistor. So like in that last picture, that's why the ballast resistor wasn't there, because I had cut the wire and I was going to run a new wire to the ignition. So this was the ballast or the coil, attached it to the firewall, rewired it. As you can see, I used a wiring loom, which they didn't have on the wiring previously, from the professional wiring shop. Um, but they had all these cuts and crimps and stuff like that that weren't part of the wiring harness that I bought. And you can kind of see, let's see here. If you know anything about wiring, like where this wire is touching the firewall here, there's actually exposed wire there behind the way it's bent like that. It's not fully crimped into that sleeve, into that connection. So it started arcing right there. So I actually had to completely replace that coil wire after this. So eventually I got the wiring figured out. Oops. For the coil anyway, and determined it was not the coil to begin with, and it was somewhere else. So, process of elimination, let the research, let the sleuthing begin. So let's see. I hate this second monitor thing because the images are so small. But you can see this was that wire I was talking about that I had to redo here. See the exposed wire there? It was literally just leaning against metal, which you don't want. It wasn't even inside of this crimp here. So I had to redo all that, which again, this was something that the other shop was supposed to do with the new wiring harness, which they did not do. Okay, so like the next step after that, I kind of, since I replaced the coil wires, I wanted to replace the spark plug wires just to make sure they were good. So it had these old janky things on there, and a lot of the connectors were dry rotted, and so you could pull them out real easy. So I bought a nice set of 8 millimeter wires and proceeded to replace all the spark plug wires. This was the set of wires I bought. I wanted these straight jacketed end ones because of the way my car is. It has headers, and these fit right between the headers. Didn't need to use didn't have to worry about angles or anything like that, or the wires really touching the headers. So bought a new set of wires and proceeded. Hold on a sec here. Sorry, folks. This is that Unilite system I was talking about. Like this piece in the middle, that goes inside the distributor, and it has an optical sensor on the end here. But it has a traditional or standard distributor cap, so you can still use it on an old distributor. Just retrofit this centerpiece onto that. And so I thought maybe this optical sensor, something was bad and it wasn't allowing full spark to take place when the distributor is turning. So I ended up replacing that as well. I replaced the coil, I replaced this piece of the distributor. They call it a 605 Unilight ignition module. So I replaced that, rewired it as well. Replaced the cap, so brand new cap. So I figured, okay, that should be all good. Try to start it again. Same thing. Just wouldn't wouldn't get 12 volts to the coil. Like when I would turn it on, it would get 12 volts, but when I'd crank it, it wasn't getting the full voltage. So, oops, sorry. So after doing this, and this is stuff, keep in mind, that I shouldn't have been doing to begin with, because I paid these guys to make sure this was all good. Like this, that it, and my words to them was, I wanted this car to start and run. It didn't have to stop or drive or anything, because I needed to work on the brakes on the other side. I just wanted the engine to turn over and spark to get to the spark plugs. So after replacing all this, that was not solving the problem. Um, all right. Trying to. Okay, so like this is the actual distributor at the back of the engine, and I thought, well, maybe the distributor's loose, like maybe it's turned 180 degrees away from the way it should be, blah blah blah. But I checked it, and it was clamped down where it should have been, because I made sure top dead center was where it was supposed to be. So like on a distributor cap, depending on what kind of engine you have, on a distributor cap over here. So let's say like the firing order of this particular Olds engine that's in this car, it's an Olds 455. The first cylinder that fires is cylinder one. So wherever cylinder one is the spark plug wire for it, the distributor, like if you were to take off the cap, the distributor should be pointing at that particular cylinder. So I verified the firing order on the caps to make sure the wires for the cylinders in the firing order were in the order, because this particular one goes counterclockwise, not clockwise like a typical GM engine. It goes counterclockwise. So I made those wires match the cylinders that they were supposed to be matching. So I made sure that the engine itself, when I checked this, was at top dead center. And the way you do that, I know you're learning all kinds of stuff. Well, I'm guessing if you're watching this video, you're a car guy and you already know this stuff. And God bless you if you're watching this and you're not a car guy or gal, and you're wanting to learn something. That's cool. I appreciate it. So that one image I had, this right here, basically this is the timing bracket. So wherever zero is on this, the when the engine's at top dead center, the first piston on the compression stroke should be at the top. So the easiest way to check that is to take the spark plug wire off and then take the spark plug out. So you just have the hole to the combustion chamber. So you put your finger, like your thumb over it or something that like a tactile thing, like you can feel, and you just cover the hole. And then you manually crank the engine by hand. In this case, just using a big wrench on the front of the harmonic balance on the front of the engine. And when the piston's coming to the top of the compression stroke, it'll put pressure on your finger. It'll it's like trying to push your finger off. It'll like do a little kind of thing. So when I felt that puff of air, pushing my thumb off, I knew it was either at or really, really, really close to top dead center. So, once that happens, then you can check your distributor and check everything else to make sure it's at the starting point of the combustion cycle or ignition cycle firing order. And it was so that was eliminated from the process. Um, so I was getting a little frustrated. So it took me about a month of just dinking around, looking at the book for the wiring harness and looking at the GM specific stuff. And I started to get an idea that the problems I was having, let's see here. So the way you can test Spark 2 is, besides the engine not starting, just to see if you're getting spark, there's a test light that you can use. Like one end of the spark plug wire hooks to it, and then the other end connects to the spark plug. So if there's current going through it, the little light inside of it as the engine's turning and the distributor's moving, and every time it goes to fire, you should see a little like light up every time there's power going through that. So I had my wife hold the camera and record while I cranked the engine and had that test light on the first cylinder. And for the first several times, nothing. There was nothing. Like the first several times where I replaced components. So the longer I thought about it, after about 30 days of messing around with it, and after looking at the book, I thought, maybe this problem is in the ignition, like in the ignition switch somewhere, or in the ignition wiring. Maybe these guys, because I had assumed that they at least knew what they were doing as far as the wiring goes. Like they knew what wire went in the ignition and yada, yada, yada. So, but I assumed incorrectly. Good thing I'm a problem solver. Like I'm very methodical about going down a list of things and eliminating things. And so really the last thing was the actual ignition switch itself in the dash, like where you put the key and turn it, the wires that are connected to the back of that. So after looking at the book and looking at the dash mounted ignition for that period of GM cars, I looked under the dash. I actually took the ignition switch out. I think I have a picture of that here somewhere. And since I've got it out, this is the actual ignition harness that connects to the tabs on the back of the ignition switch. And you can see they have these little metal blades in there, and they slide over the blades like a male-female kind of setup over the blades on the back of the ignition switch. So I think I have an image of that too. Is this one better? Oh, looks like the same image. Oh, well. So anyway, like this to the left here is the actual back of the ignition switch after I pulled it. Oops, sorry. Just dropped something on my keyboard. Anyway, this was actually, sorry, while it was still connected in the dash, the wiring was still, hadn't pulled it out because this is all behind the dash here. But just to give you an idea, I had to manually replace all right, so this is that same piece. This is that plastic piece, that sleeve that goes over the back of the ignition switch. And this is after I had pulled it out of the dash, and you can see the brake pedal there. But you can see these colored wires here. Like the pink wires are basically for the ignition itself. Like it's power to the ignition. So when you turn it, you should get 12 volts while you're cranking it. This red wire goes to the battery. The purple wire goes, I believe, to the solenoid, and the orange one is for like accessories. So like, again, if you just turn it on, it has power to the accessories. So the more I looked at this, first of all, it was supposed to be replaced with a new one. And this was so ratty and so loose. I could not believe that they let this fly. You know, from the back it looked okay, and this is going to come into play. So where these two pink wires are here, both of these pink wires are in the same slot. So keep that in the back of your head. But yeah, it was just a really, really sad looking. You know, you can see how torn up and chewed up, like it had been used many times or taken on and off many times. And here's another thing to notice too that I noticed. See how these have all like little brass or aluminum tabs in them? Like, you know, here, 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 here. You notice how you can see through this spot right here and see through this spot? Like there's no tabs in there. So keep that in the back of your head. All right. So going back to this other image here. So what I did is I cut every wire. I pulled the wires out of that little plastic harness and I cut every one of them. So I knew where these wires were already because I followed them into the under the dash and into the engine compartment and that kind of stuff to make sure that they went where they were supposed to go. And if you notice that I separated these pink wires here. Like, so the blades on the back of the ignition switch, I had to actually I had to buy these little, sleeves or little crimp connections. And so I crimp connected each one of these and slid these onto the blades on the back of the ignition switch where they were supposed to go. So what was happening, I don't know if I have an image of it, but sorry, I just literally, when I did all of this today, since I'm using my Mac and I just got it not that long ago, it wants to try and download my images from iCloud from my phone because some of these images are on my phone. So when I moved them into this folder, it didn't have time to download all the ones that I had copied over. So I'm missing a bunch of pictures that I really needed for this particular episode. So I do apologize in advance. But I have a point to all this. Oops. Well, anyway, I'll just have to describe it. That's the best thing I could do because I don't have an actual image for it. All right. So anyway, on the wiring diagram for that particular ignition switch for that car, if it was an in-dash mounted ignition switch and it was certain years, whatever, it mentioned in like the notes in the bottom, it mentioned like a jumper wire. And on that particular ignition, actually, I might have a video. Let's see here. Do I have a video? I do have one. Let me make sure. Okay, I do. So I don't know that you're going to hear the sound that way. Let me do it this way. Let me pull it up as a video itself. So share media 350. Where are you? 350. Yeah. Let me. All right, let me stop sharing my screen real quick. Yeah, see, it's grayed out, like it's not completely downloaded or something. That's weird. All right, so long story short, I'll play the video and I'll stop it at a point here. So I don't know if you can hear that. I can hear it, but I don't know if you can hear that. Okay, so what I am going to stop it right here because this is the showing that old plastic sleeve or harness that goes on the back of the ignition, and here we have those two pink wires where it's connected. That was called ignition one, and right above it, and this here is ignition two, which has nothing in it, and then there's another empty slot which is actually a ground. So what the manual called for, if these yahoos would have actually read it, it called for well, not only these wires to be separate, so like there was one wire for ignition one and this other pink wire for ignition two, but it required a jumper from ignition one to ignition two. So a piece of wire that was connecting these two. Because what was happening to the car when you would turn it on, it would get 12 volts because it was getting the power to the accessories. But when you would actually crank it, there was no voltage going to ignition two. Ignition two is where it connects or completes the circuit so the voltage can continue to the coil, which then sends it to the spark plugs. So once I separated these wires, as you saw previously, and then put a jumper on there, um, so as you can see, the two pink wires are separated. And then after this picture, I ended up putting a jumper between the two. So once I did that, and I actually, you can see the black, I added a ground wire that I attached to the engine block. So I added a ground wire, made sure the solenoid wire was connected to where it was supposed to go to the starter. And so when I put the ignition back into the dash, made sure everything was tidied up under the hood. As soon as I turned the key over, the test light started sparking, started showing light. So now it was holding the 12 volts while it was cranking. So it was continually getting the power it needed to the coil. So it was like, hallelujah, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And you have no idea how happy I was to find the spark coming. Like, so now I just had to determine, will it actually start? So I removed that test light, put the spark plug back in, put the wire back on, and lo and behold, even with the old gas, it it cranked over. It was horrible because it was it was shooting flames out the exhaust and rust and everything else out of the exhaust. Like my wife was freaking out because where the exhaust ends, it's apparently close enough to the back wall of the garage, and it was shooting flames at the crap sitting along the back wall. So she was afraid I was going to burn the garage down, and I didn't know it was shooting flames. So anyway, I was ecstatic that it was actually going to start. Like if I all things equal and had good gas, a new fuel system, whatever, it's going to run. Like it's going to crank and it's going to run. So I was extraordinarily happy. I was like, I don't know if you've ever worked on something where you worked on it so hard for so long, and this was just like one little step, one little piece of the puzzle, you know. But I was super ecstatic that I was on my way to figuring. I thought everything else would be a cakewalk after this. God, I still can't believe I don't have my pictures. I promise next time we'll be more prepared because the folder system on a Mac works a little different than it does on Windows. And I thought I had copied and pasted all the stuff I needed from raw folder that I have all the pictures in. So anyway, I know I'm babbling, but thanks for sticking around. So that leads me into, once I got the wiring stuff figured out, and again, I was so pissed off and disappointed because I paid these guys 2 grand. I supplied the wiring harness. I paid these guys 2 grand just to install it. And it was a simple install. Everything was simple install except for maybe some of the under dash stuff. But this is an old school car. It doesn't have any computers, no electronic anything. Everything is very just straightforward, but apparently not for experts. So I was pissed. Still, still kind of eating at me that I spent that money and I had to do all the work to get it to run. But bygones be bygones, and I was like, okay, on to the next step. But since I didn't get the car back until, October, it was already fall, and there's no way I was going to get it to a shop for the next step. So the next step, and this will be the subject of the next video in this series, excuse me, was I wanted, because the car had all original drum brakes, and so drum brakes all on all 4 wheels. Had, as far as I knew, had the original brake lines and the original fuel lines, original fuel tank, original tie rods and suspension and steering components. So my goal was, the next step was to make it run and stop. So I wanted the fuel system, fixed or replaced, whether the lines were good or not, I don't know. So I wanted somebody to do a 4-wheel disc brake conversion on this car. So new calipers, new rotors, new spindles, everything. And in the front, if you know anything about tubular control arms, I wanted tubular control arms put on there instead of the stock control arms. And fix anything that needed to be fixed. Like if ball joints are bad, replace the ball joints. Any of the steering components like tie rods or idler arm, anything like that, I wanted just replace it. And new fuel tank and new brake lines if it needed it. New and just stuff like that. I had a list of stuff, and like I wanted a new shifter. I wanted to put the actual GTO shifter, console shifter in there, because it had an old B&M janky shifter in there, and it was a knuckle buster because whoever put it in there mounted it too far under the dash. So when you put it in park, your knuckles literally scraped under half the dash. So I wanted that out of there, and I had the stock shifter, automatic shifter for it, and I wanted that put in. So just a lot of stuff like that. So apparently in Northern Ohio, though, unless you're building a race car or some kind of high performance car, nobody wants to work on classic cars or carbureted engines unless it's like a full restoration, like a $50,000 job or something like that. And the people that I could find that were willing to do any of the work that I had just mentioned were smaller mom and pop shops that were like a year or 2 years out, because they were good at what they did and they didn't have big shops and they only worked on 1 or 2 cars at a time and blah, blah, blah. And there was waiting lists on a lot of them. So, and I'm 59 years old, and I grew up, my dad, that was my connection with my dad, was working on cars. So a lot of the stuff I could have done myself, but again, no room in my garage, don't have a lift, and I'm not going to just jack up my car and crawl around underneath, at my age anyway, or my physical condition anyway. I've been hard on my body over my life, and so I wanted somebody else to do it, and so I got somebody at a shop about 10 miles away. I totally found him by accident somewhere on Facebook. And because I normally don't, if you know me, I normally don't use Facebook. It was, it was even called Muscle Car Gym. Like, so they even had the term that I liked, like for the car was actually in the title of the business or the name of the business. So I called the shop, and actually the owner came out to my house and he looked at my car, and I told him all the stuff that I wanted done. And I said, just give me a price with all the stuff that I mentioned, and give me a price if you were to replace it with stock stuff. Like, so if I didn't want a disc brake conversion and all the tubular control arms and that kind of stuff, if just replace them with drums all the way around again and new pads and, new brake lines, that kind of stuff. Cause I had a feeling it was going to be expensive. So he quoted me a really good price for the more performance version of it. So we made a deal, or I verbally made a deal. But again, this was coming on late fall, and he wasn't in a position to do anything, and I wasn't going to let it go kind of over the winter. And because I wanted to do some things with the interior, I wanted to remove some more of the interior components and that kind of thing, and get the seat bracket situation figured out. So I kept the car, and we agreed, like in March or April or whatever, when it started warming up, that I would take it down to his shop. So he slotted it in for, spring, to do all the work at a price that I thought was reasonable. So in the next video, we'll talk about my experience with that particular shop and the work that they did and did not do. And then just kind of go from there, because there's a third shop involved after that. So like, this has been like 3 years of different shops holding me back from getting my car on the road. Like this should all the stuff I've been talking about, if it was a reputable shop, and max year and a half to get all the stuff that I wanted done, because it's not unreasonable stuff and it's not exotic stuff. But it even pushed me to the point where my wife and I were talking about, because I was so frustrated by this, of me buying a shop and opening a shop myself and working on restoring classic cars. It almost came to that point. We actually came to a point where we were going to sign the dotted line on a shop and take it over and just kind of run with it. But we ended up not doing it, because it was the same shop that was going to do the work that I was just describing for that spring. So anyway, I know I can hear my wife just like, get to the point. What are you gonna do? But if you're like me and you love old cars, you love classic cars, muscle cars, whatever, you feel my pain. Well, some of you might have gotten show cars to begin with and never had to do any work to them. But if you're a tinkerer like I am, and you like messing with stuff with your hands, you know the kind of projects I'm talking about, and you know what kind of experience I'm going through. So hopefully, if you have a project you're working on, you're not having the same issues that I'm having. And if you live in Northern Ohio and you know anybody, or even actually as far down as Columbus, if you know anybody that's reasonable, that can do work, if I need work in a pinch, or, because I'm pretty much at this point, after all this time, I'm pretty much done with the car, as far as the mechanical stuff goes. So next video will be the experience at this other shop and the work they were supposed to do and what work they did and did not do. So I don't know when that'll be, but that'll probably be a couple videos down the road, 2, 3, whatever. But the next video will probably be, for this channel, will be on something like Edgar Casey, or I might even talk about the whole Coffre pyramid deal, because I wanted to give it the old smell test first, the old 72-hour, week-long, whatever smell test before I actually dove into it, because that's something that always has interested me, and I've always followed the whole ancient alien paleo contact stuff. alien conspiracy kind of things. So I may do something on that, or I may do, like I said, Edgar Casey, or I may redo another NASA video, because you can never have enough NASA videos, not a space agency. But I hope you enjoyed this. I hope if you stuck around and watched the whole video, I hope you got something out of this. Again, if you're working on a project, God love you. It's to me, it's worth it in the end, even with all the frustration that I've had. I could tell you there's not a better feeling than having done something with your own hands and your own determination and your own problem solving, and then make it work, and make it really work and be safe and usable. So, okay, I'll stop rambling, but I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please comment if you have any suggestions for future content, or even if you have an old car and what kind of project are you working on? Throw that in the comments. So until next time, Hogman out.